The moment Jane knew they'd crossed the line wasn't when they excluded her from the strategy meeting. It was when she saw the director of operations, Richard Voss, lean back in his ergonomic chair with that satisfied smirk after announcing her project budget had been reallocated for maximum efficiency. That patronizing nod said everything. They thought she was broken, compliant, manageable, like office furniture that occasionally spoke up during quarterly reviews. In that instant, Jane wasn't furious. She was calculating. That particular brand of stillness where your pulse steadies, your vision sharpens, and your mind whispers, "All right. So that's how we're playing this." 3 hours later, she watched through the break room window as the executive team raised champagne flutes over some mediocre catered lunch, celebrating operational streamlining, or whatever buzzword justified gutting her department. She stirred her instant coffee with the same plastic spoon she'd used to unclog the printer last Tuesday. Nobody acknowledged her presence. Nobody ever did. Standing 5 feet from their glass-walled celebration, Jane blended into the beige walls in her sensible blazer, invisible as wallpaper. To them, she was reliable, predictable, harmless. But here's the thing about being underestimated: you hear everything. And Jane? She remembered every slight, every dismissive comment, every "thanks for being a team player" that really meant "thanks for doing my job while I take credit." By the way, 96% of people hearing stories like this never hit subscribe. If you're part of the silent majority, consider tapping that follow button. It helps us keep exposing corporate nonsense more than those mandatory fun team-building retreats ever helped morale. Trust me. Back to our regularly scheduled disrespect. When Jane first joined Meridian Logistics 8 years ago, she'd inherited a disaster. Supply chain software from the Stone Age, vendor relationships held together with prayer and post-it notes, and a warehouse system that somehow made inventory disappear faster than donuts in a break room. She fixed it. Quietly. Efficiently. Without PowerPoint presentations or credit-seeking emails. Then came the promotions. Sideways promotions. Her responsibilities multiplied while her budget shrank. They called her indispensable during performance reviews, corporate speak for "we can't afford to lose her but also can't afford to properly compensate her." Every time some smooth-talking consultant with a fresh MBA bungled a logistics forecast, they'd approach her with that familiar refrain, "Jane, you're so good at this stuff. Mind taking a look?" She minded. But she did it anyway. Not for the executives collecting bonuses off her work, but for the warehouse staff who depended on functional systems to feed their families. The decay started with Garrett Flynn, the new VP of Strategic Operations. He wore designer sneakers to connect with the floor team, and once asked Jane if we still used actual trucks for deliveries. When she corrected his math on a vendor analysis, politely, professionally, he chuckled like she'd asked him to explain quantum physics. Later, she overheard him in the elevator telling Richard, "She's technically competent, but not leadership material. Good for maintenance work." That comment burrowed under her skin like a splinter. Not because it hurt, but because it revealed everything. Jane didn't storm into his office. She didn't fire back with workplace comebacks. She opened the small leather notebook she kept beside her emergency phone charger and wrote it down. Date, time, witnesses, exact quote. Because Jane didn't react. She documented. She watched the slow transformation of strategic operations into whatever Garrett thought made sense that week. Legacy clients started jumping ship. She sat through meetings where decisions were made by people who confused authority with intelligence. Through it all, she smiled, nodded, and even fetched her own coffee when the machine was acting up. She also had her law school friend, Elena, quietly review her employment contract over dinner and wine. That notebook filled up quickly. Her nickname on the floor was the Fixer, whispered with genuine respect. But in the C-suite, she was Reliable Jane, a placeholder who made problems disappear. They assumed her calm demeanor meant submission, that her professional tone indicated passivity. But Jane Patterson had learned from watching her grandmother negotiate with bill collectors who underestimated a widow with 3 kids and an iron will. Quiet wasn't weakness. It was precision. And Jane's aim was surgical. The consultant's cologne announced his arrival before the elevator doors opened. It reeked of overpriced confidence and desperation masked as strategy. Too much product in his hair, shoes too shiny, handshake too practiced. His name was Dawson, and he wore a suit that screamed, "I charge by the hour and bill for breathing." Dawson took one look at the quarterly numbers and started talking about organizational bloat. Then he turned to the CEO and said, "You're carrying a lot of emotional overhead. That's expensive. You need surgical efficiency, not sentiment." Jane sat 3 chairs away, sipping lukewarm conference room coffee and mentally drafting a spreadsheet titled "Red Flags This Man is Waving." The meeting was 2 hours of consultant word salad, right-sizing, optimization protocols, trimming legacy attachments. Nobody said layoffs outright, but you don't hire a corporate surgeon like Dawson unless you're planning to cut deep. That evening, Jane skipped her usual glass of wine and called Elena. "Hypothetically," she said, "what's the cleanest way to ensure I get properly compensated if a company decides I'm emotionally expensive?" Elena, bless her ruthless legal mind, didn't miss a beat. Profit participation clause. Not revenue, not salary multiples, net profit. Tie it to involuntary termination only. Make it look like standard continuation coverage. Bury it in contract renewal paperwork where nobody reads the fine print. They worked it out over 3 glasses of questionable red wine and an encrypted email thread. Clause 17D became 17E became 17F. The language was surgical, camouflaged beneath boring HR terminology like transition assurance and operational continuity provisions. The clause read like an afterthought: 15% of net profit for the fiscal year, payable upon involuntary termination not attributed to misconduct, negligence, or criminal action. Triggered only when no alternative severance package is provided. Payment due within 60 days of written notice. A financial scalpel disguised as a safety net. Jane printed it, signed it, and slid it across the table to the in-house counsel, Patricia Winters, the same woman who once tried to file a trademark application in crayon. Patricia glanced at it, yawned and muttered, "Standard continuation stuff," before signing with the flourish of someone too overworked to care. Jane smiled politely. No celebration, no victory dance. Just the quiet satisfaction of inserting accountability into a system allergic to consequences. She didn't update her LinkedIn or tell anyone, not even Carlos in IT, who always slipped her extra printer paper when supplies ran low. Instead, she filed the countersigned copy in her home safe, right next to her passport and grandmother's jewelry. Not because she expected them to target her immediately, but because she knew they eventually would. In the weeks that followed, Jane kept her radar active. Budget memos got restructured. Projects she'd spearheaded were handed to people who needed GPS to find the supply closet. Her team was scattered across departments like seeds in a hurricane. They started having meetings without inviting her. Scheduling oversight, they'd claim. But oversights don't happen 5 times in 2 weeks unless they're deliberate. So Jane smiled brighter. Asked clarifying questions. Volunteered to reorganize spreadsheets nobody would read. She played grateful, diminished, compliant, because what they didn't know was that Clause 17F wasn't just buried paperwork anymore. It was a loaded weapon with the safety off. They called it Project Renaissance, because corporate executives love naming executions after art movements. The announcement had all the warmth of a tax audit wrapped in motivational posters. Garrett stood in front of the company, teeth bleached to an unnatural whiteness, and declared, "We're shedding operational redundancies to unlock our core potential." Jane didn't flinch. She just wrote "unlock core potential equals fire people and gaslight survivors" in her notebook and underlined it twice. The next morning, her team of 7 brilliant analysts, people who actually understood the difference between logistics and wishful thinking, was dissolved like sugar in corporate acid. Some got repositioned to marketing to translate data into digestible insights. Others were loaned to HR for talent optimization. 3 got handed pink slips with coffee shop gift cards as consolation prizes. Jane? She got promoted. They called it a strategic elevation opportunity with a new title, Senior Director, Operational Excellence and Strategic Initiatives, which meant absolutely nothing and reported directly to Garrett Flynn. Garrett was 3 things: loud, inexperienced, and the human equivalent of a participation trophy. He'd once called Jane sweetheart in a meeting about supply chain optimization, then asked if she could simplify the back-end numbers for the creative types in the room. His last big initiative was a social media campaign for B2B freight visibility. It lasted 4 hours and cost 6 figures. Jane shook his hand, smiled professionally, and created a new folder on her personal drive, Evidence Flynn Mismanagement. Garrett held stand-ups where everyone sat down and collaborative brainstorming sessions that were mostly him reciting business school platitudes like scripture. Jane spoke exactly 3 times in the first week. Each time, Garrett cut her off mid-sentence to say, "Great energy, but let's table that for later." They never returned to those tables. Jane documented everything. She tracked every assignment redirected away from her, every email chain she got dropped from, every decision made without her input despite being the most experienced operations director in the building. She logged timestamps, participants, digital trails, every breadcrumb. Then in week 4, Garrett presented her own supply chain efficiency model in a board meeting with her watermark scrubbed and his name in Times New Roman at the bottom. "Developed this framework over the weekend," he announced with the confidence of someone who thought Excel was magic. Jane smiled wider than usual. "Impressive," she said. "Reminds me of something I saw in Q2. Nobody caught the edge in her voice except Linda from accounting, who nearly choked on her coffee. After the meeting, Garrett patted Jane's shoulder like they were college buddies. "Great working relationship we've got," he said. "Now we just need to optimize some of your legacy budget allocations, right?" She filed that under Flynn Attribution Theft Efficiency Model. At night, Jane didn't drink wine to forget. She went running. Past the neighborhood where she grew up, breath fogging like steam from overworked machinery, replaying every condescending comment, every Jane quick favor, every backhanded team player remark. They weren't just marginalizing her. They were erasing her contributions while keeping her around to clean up their mistakes. They thought she was too professional or too beaten down to fight back. But Jane Patterson didn't need applause. She needed evidence. And evidence she had in quadruplicate. The CEO practiced his concerned expression in the bathroom mirror that morning, you could tell. Eyebrows lowered just enough to suggest empathy, jaw set to imply difficult decisions ahead. He stood under the conference room's fluorescent lighting, sleeves rolled up for the working leader aesthetic, and delivered the news with the same tone you'd use to announce the coffee machine was broken. "Due to market volatility and shifting investor priorities," he said, "we've made the difficult but necessary decision to suspend year-end bonuses for all non-executive personnel." He paused for dramatic effect. "Temporarily," he added like a used car salesman promising reliability. "We're still a family, and families make sacrifices together." Jane didn't blink. She stared straight ahead, expression neutral as Switzerland, while faces around the room shifted through stages of disbelief. Someone muttered something under their breath, but Jane just sipped her terrible conference room coffee and studied the man who once called her the engine that keeps us running. Apparently, he decided she was a spare tire. The word non-executive echoed like a slap wrapped in corporate speak. It wasn't about the money, not entirely. It was the classification, the branding of her 8 years as expendable, while Garrett probably got a retention bonus for showing up on time. 2 days later, they called her in. The HR representative was new, nervous, and reading from a script printed on premium cardstock. Jane didn't sit. She stood with arms crossed, watching the woman's voice shake on effective immediately. The phrase hung in the air like smoke. "No cause," they said. "Just restructuring. We sincerely regret this decision." No mention of the systems she'd rebuilt after 2 failed software implementations. No acknowledgement of the client relationships she'd salvaged when half the logistics team quit in 1 quarter. Just a manila envelope and a soft-voiced, "We hope you'll stay connected with our company community." Jane took the letter without her hands trembling. "Thank you," she said, calm as morning mist. The HR rep looked relieved. That relief would die a slow, expensive death within 72 hours. Outside the conference room, Garrett walked by wearing a grin like someone who'd just gotten away with stealing lunch money. "Sorry to see you go," he said. "You'll bounce back." Jane smiled. "I always do." She walked out with nothing but her phone, keys, and the termination letter folded neatly in her leather portfolio. At home, she placed it beside the countersigned contract, the one with Clause 17F highlighted in yellow, the one Patricia had called standard boilerplate continuation coverage. They didn't know it yet, but they'd just authorized a check for $2.8 million. And Jane Patterson? She always collected what she was owed. Subject line, Clause 17F Payment Enforcement. Timestamp, 9:47 a.m., Monday. Attachments, 1 PDF. Body, 1 sentence. Per Clause 17F of Jane Patterson's employment agreement, please initiate payment within the stipulated 60-day window to avoid breach of contract. Jane didn't send it herself. That honor belonged to Elena, her friend, attorney, and corporate executioner, the kind of woman who wore red lipstick to depositions and smelled like victory. She sent it while Jane made breakfast, sitting in her kitchen in comfortable silence. No rage, no gloating. Just the rare bone-deep satisfaction of knowing they had no idea what was about to hit them. By 10:15 a.m., the email reached Patricia in legal. Patricia, who used highlighters to track compliance deadlines. Patricia, who once told Jane, "Don't worry, we always handle these things quietly." Patricia, who hadn't looked at Clause 17F since signing it on a Friday afternoon between a diversity seminar and her lunch break. She opened the PDF. Read it once, then again, then a third time with her coffee getting cold. Eyes widening like she was deciphering ancient hieroglyphics. 15% of net profits. Not salary, not projected bonuses. Net profit for the entire fiscal year, triggered by involuntary termination without alternative severance. Signed, countersigned, dated. Clause 17F, ironclad and unavoidable. Patricia didn't breathe until she hit forward to the CFO. No commentary, just 4 words, "Please review immediately, urgent." Across the building, in a boardroom that still smelled like yesterday's stale bagels and broken promises, CFO Vincent Crawford opened the attachment during the morning metrics call. The man had survived 4 recessions, 3 mergers, and a stress-induced ulcer. But what he read drained the color from his face faster than his last cardiac episode. Clause 17F, he whispered like a curse word. Garrett, sitting nearby, perked up like a dog hearing a treat bag. That Patterson woman, didn't we just let her go? The CFO didn't respond. He kept reading. His Mont Blanc pen, the same one he used to sign executive bonuses and golf tournament sponsorships, slipped from his fingers and clattered on the mahogany table. "Tell me we offered her something," he muttered. "Please tell me we threw her a severance package." Patricia's voice crackled through the speakerphone. Negative. File shows standard termination. No package required per company policy. Christ, Vincent whispered. The room went silent. Garrett tried to make a joke about at least she didn't steal any office supplies, but it died in his throat because what Jane had done was infinitely worse. She'd followed their process, used their language, waited for them to pull the trigger. And now, thanks to one overlooked clause, Jane Patterson was legally entitled to exactly $2,847,630. The company had netted $18.9 million in profits this fiscal year, much of it from the government transportation contracts Jane herself had negotiated. Now 15% belonged to her. The kind of payout that doesn't just impact quarterly reports. It makes board members start auditing their own contracts. Makes shareholders start dialing lawyers. Makes Garrett start sweating through his designer button-down. No screaming, no threats, no scandal. Just one clean email and a fuse that had been burning since they underestimated the quiet woman with the receipts. Email subject, Clause 17F, clarification request. Jane read it over her morning oatmeal, one eyebrow raising just enough to amuse herself. From Patricia again, naturally, but the tone had shifted from legal confidence to barely controlled panic. Hi Jane, upon further internal review, there appears to have been a processing error in your termination paperwork. We'd like to discuss a possible settlement that fairly reflects your contributions to the company. Translation: Please don't make us swallow this grenade. The attached offer, $180,000. Jane actually laughed, a dry, amused sound that made her cat look up from his food bowl. She forwarded the message to Elena with one line: "They think I can be bought for 6.3% of what I'm owed. Should I send them a calculator?" Elena didn't reply with words. She just CC'd everyone back with surgical precision. Per our initial communication, Clause 17F clearly defines the payment structure and scope. This includes net profits from all revenue channels, including but not limited to federal transportation contracts initiated and managed under Ms. Patterson's leadership. We respectfully decline the offer. Just like that, the mood at headquarters shifted from damage control to full-scale panic. Because they had forgotten, or never realized, that the largest government contract that year, the one that single-handedly carried their Q3 projections, The $14.7 million logistics deal with Federal Transit Authority had Jane's fingerprints all over it. She had written the proposal, negotiated the terms, and personally flew to Washington on her own vacation time to seal the deal. There were emails, photographs, even a LinkedIn post from Garrett where he'd cropped her out of the handshake photo and captioned it, "Teamwork drives results." Now that teamwork meant her payout had just increased to astronomical proportions. In the boardroom, the CFO stared at revised calculations like they might change if he blinked hard enough. "Paying her means we take a massive hit on reported earnings," he said, jaw clenched tight enough to crack molars. "That'll destroy our investor call." "And not paying her?" the CEO asked, pacing like a caged animal. "Breach of contract. Full legal exposure. Arbitration costs, media risk, regulatory scrutiny. We hemorrhage money either way." Patricia tried to interject something about settlement precedents, but the CEO cut her off. "How did we miss this?" "Because it was buried in standard continuation language," Patricia replied. "Nobody reads those clauses." Garrett, pale and sweaty, mumbled, "She always was detail-oriented." Outside that room, Jane sat on her back porch with coffee in both hands, not because she needed the warmth but because she deserved to hold something solid while the structure she used to support collapsed under its own arrogance. They had mistaken her professionalism for weakness, her precision for passivity. Now they were trapped by their own signatures and digital timestamps. They couldn't retroactively offer severance without admitting fault. Couldn't negotiate without validating the clause. Couldn't ignore it without facing a lawsuit that would drag them through headlines like toilet paper on a shoe. Every hour they delayed payment, the pressure mounted. Every investor update they postponed, the whispers grew louder. Jane didn't raise her voice or make demands. She just waited, because the trap wasn't made of anger. It was made of math. Jane filed the arbitration paperwork on a Tuesday. Clear skies, birds singing, the kind of morning that promised fresh starts, not corporate financial bleeding. Elena submitted the documents with the precision of a sniper, no press releases, no public theatrics, just clean legal filing under the American Arbitration Association's Employment Contract Division. Attached were 63 pages of exhibits, signed contracts, performance evaluations, profit statements, email threads, and yes, a digitally enhanced version of Garrett's not leadership material elevator comment, courtesy of building security footage with surprisingly good audio. By Wednesday, the phrase "significant legal contingency related to former personnel claim" appeared buried in the footnotes of the company's quarterly investor update. Small text, massive implications. The update dropped at 5:30 p.m. on a Wednesday, using the classic executive strategy of hoping shareholders would be too distracted by dinner plans to notice. But numbers speak louder than timing. Around 5:43, phones started ringing. Potential liability exceeding forecasted parameters hit the investment community like a financial Molotov cocktail. At 6:02 p.m., one of the firm's largest institutional investors flagged the disclosure in a group email. "Is this the Patterson situation?" No one replied immediately. By Thursday morning, internal Slack channels were buzzing with terms like reputation management and contractual exposure mitigation. The company tried to contain it, but you can't unring a bell once it starts echoing through forums where people use phrases like exit positioning and Q4 restructuring. Friday brought resignations. First, the VP of Investor Relations, Harold Morrison, company loyalist, CEO's golf partner, wearer of seasonally inappropriate clothing, announced he was pursuing new opportunities. His LinkedIn went dark before lunch. His departure triggered internal questions. A mid-level compliance manager asked on record whether other employment contracts might contain similar risks. She was told to focus on controllable variables. She resigned the following Monday. By the next week, 6 shareholders had submitted formal inquiry letters to the board. Legal costs were climbing. Insurance providers requested full access to arbitration documentation. And in a quiet corner office, a junior financial analyst whispered, "Who the hell is Jane Patterson?" as if saying her name might summon her like a corporate ghost. Meanwhile, Jane was at her neighborhood coffee shop, splitting a crossword puzzle and scone with her mother. She watched headlines scroll past on her phone with the detachment of someone watching weather reports for another city. One caught her attention: logistics firm postpones earnings call amid legal uncertainty. She took a bite of scone. "Dry," she commented. "What's dry?" her mother asked. Just something I worked really hard on, Jane replied. In the company's marble-floored war room, the CEO paced hard enough to trigger his fitness tracker's cardio alert. We need to contain this, he said through gritted teeth. She's not even talking to reporters, and she's destroying us. Maybe that's the point, the CFO replied, half in admiration. Can't spin silence. The irony was thick enough to cut with a severance check. They had spent years ignoring Jane's contributions. Now her silence was the loudest sound in the building, and it was shredding their reputation one whispered conversation at a time. Subject: exciting opportunity for partnership. Jane read it over iced tea and a salad she wasn't sure she actually wanted. The message was lengthy, saccharine, and reeking of desperation disguised as opportunity, like someone had tried to gift wrap a house fire. It came directly from the CEO. Not through lawyers, not from assistants. Him. The same man who'd called her our secret weapon in company meetings and budget line item in boardroom discussions. Now apparently, he wanted to explore avenues for collaboration and leverage Jane's extraordinary institutional knowledge in a fresh executive capacity. Translation: please come back and help us fix the disaster you warned us about 2 years ago. They offered her a new title with actual substance: Executive Vice President, Strategic Operations. They dangled reinstated bonuses, triple her previous compensation, a discretionary equity package, even mentioned a press release announcing her strategic return to leadership. It wasn't an olive branch. It was a life preserver thrown from a sinking ship. Jane took exactly 6 minutes to consider it. 4 were spent stirring her tea. The other 2 were spent rereading the arbitration filing on her laptop, highlighting one sentence: this action seeks accountability and proper compensation, not reemployment. She didn't respond to the email. Instead, she forwarded it to 3 business journalists who'd covered the company's recent earnings volatility. Subject line: ongoing arbitration related to contractual violations and executive mismanagement. Body text: happy to provide additional documentation upon request. This matter remains active and enforceable. Attached: arbitration filing, Clause 17F, termination letter, and the laughably desperate rehire proposal. She clicked send, then took another sip of tea. Within 18 hours, the first story broke: former executive files 7-figure claim over ignored contract clause, company scrambles to rehire. Within 36 hours, it was trending across LinkedIn, Reddit, and industry forums. People weren't just sharing the story, they were dissecting it, analyzing the clause, applauding the strategy. The contract clause went viral among employment lawyers and HR professionals like it was the Magna Carta. She built a financial guillotine with legal paperwork. Jane Patterson is my new career role model. Every corporate employee just bookmarked Clause 17F. The company tried damage control, issuing a statement about internal negotiations taken out of context. But that only added fuel to the fire, because if there's one thing corporate PR departments never learn, it's that gaslighting the public backfires harder than honesty ever could. Meanwhile, Jane was at a local art gallery with her mother, phone buzzing with journalist requests. She didn't answer them. She took a photo of a blooming sculpture instead, because the point was never to scream for attention. The point was to be undeniable. They had tried to bury her with jargon, restructuring, and selective amnesia. But Jane didn't need spotlights or applause. She needed one thing: to be heard. And now, even in silence, her name carried more weight than their entire PR department. The boardroom felt like a morgue. Not metaphorically, literally cold, quiet, and filled with people who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The CFO stood at the head of the conference table, voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the denial that had been hanging in the air like expensive cologne. Clause 17F, he said, holding the document like evidence in a murder trial. 15% of net profits for the fiscal year, payable upon involuntary termination without cause when no alternative severance is provided. He didn't elaborate, didn't soften the blow. Just read it word for word like a financial death sentence. When he finished, silence filled the room, the kind that follows car accidents or marriage proposals gone catastrophically wrong. A few nervous coughs, someone's phone buzzing against the table. Then the CEO's water glass slipped from his hand, hitting the floor with a hollow thud followed by the sound of crystal shattering in slow motion. Nobody moved to clean it up. They all stared at the broken pieces because this wasn't just a lawsuit anymore. This was corporate execution, clean and irreversible. The CEO leaned back in his chair, face the color of old newspaper. "So we pay her?" he asked, voice cracking just enough to reveal how small he felt. The CFO nodded once. "Or face full breach of contract. Arbitration becomes binding court judgment in less than 30 days. Media already has the documentation. Any settlement would no longer be confidential." Nobody asked how this happened. They knew. They had let it happen by firing the most competent person in the building without reading her contract, without listening to her concerns, without considering that the quiet woman with the color-coded files might be the most dangerous person they'd ever underestimated. They had mistaken silence for surrender. Now they were about to transfer $2,847,630 into her account and watch their quarterly profits evaporate like morning dew. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, Jane Patterson sat on a beach chair, toes in warm sand, eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses as she scrolled market updates on her tablet. The company's stock had dropped 4 points overnight. Investor confidence was bleeding out. She smiled slightly. Next to her, a tropical drink with too many paper umbrellas. Behind her, waves doing their eternal rhythm. And in front of her, vindication. No toxic meetings about synergistic optimization. No condescending explanations of her own data analysis. No men in designer sneakers asking if she could dumb down complex logistics for their benefit. Just her, a bank notification chime, and the sound of justice landing with a 7-figure impact. Her mother handed her a mystery novel without speaking. Jane accepted it with a nod and settled deeper into her chair, because this wasn't revenge. Not exactly. It was restitution. And she hadn't burned the building down. She had invoiced it. What I love about this story is how it flips the entire power dynamic. In most corporate dramas, the employee scrambles desperately to survive the system. But here, the company walked directly into a legal trap they never bothered to read and paid the ultimate price for their arrogance. It's a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous people in any organization aren't the loudest or most obvious. They're the ones quietly rewriting the rules while everyone else is playing politics. Thanks for reading, you beautiful rebels. Subscribe to keep these corporate comeuppance stories coming. Your former colleagues will never see it coming.